The Roman Republic might have seemed indestructible, but its foundation had been under attack for centuries. Political struggle was replaced by civil strife and military struggle, and this time the stakes were even higher. The time for talk was over, the Rubicon was crossed. The fate of Rome would now be decided by two of its greatest generals, Caesar and Pompey. Thanks to Call of War for sponsoring this video. Call of War is a free-to-play real-time cross-platform strategy game played by millions of users worldwide, with historically accurate army units that move in real time on historical maps, a huge tech tree with over 120 different units, battles with up to 100 human players, with a complex economy and trade. Everything is possible in Call of War. Play through all the different scenarios and outcomes of World War II. The game starts in a historically accurate World War II setting and allows you to rewrite history in any way. Choose your country, join the war, and fight other players in real time. Tank rush your opponents, establish air superiority, flood enemy ground with battalions of infantry, bombard coastal cities with mighty naval fleets, or dominate with secret weapons such as nuclear bombers and V2 rockets. You can play with the same account on PC or mobile and sign up for new special events with different maps, different scenarios and different objectives each week. Support our channel by downloading Call of War via the link in the description and receive a free starter pack with 1 month of High Command and 13,000 gold with a value of $10. Hurry, it's only available for 30 days for those who sign up through the link in the description. In early January 49 BC, Caesar crossed the Rubicon with the 13th Legion, beginning the Great Roman Civil War, a turning point in Roman history. Following the crossing, Caesar had moved with his telltale swiftness and quickly seized key locations in northern Italy in a matter of days. There was little resistance. These cities had not been garrisoned to defend against any significant force, and there were many who sympathized with Caesar against Pompey and the Optimates. As he went, he sent orders to his Gallic legions for reinforcements to march south and join him. In Rome itself, there was mass confusion described by Cicero. Pompey may have thought that if Caesar was to go to war, he would wait for his legions from Gaul. He hesitated and did not know whether to defend Rome, abandon the city and fight in Italy, or abandon the peninsula altogether. If Pompey had reacted quickly, he may have been able to levy enough troops to defeat him, stopping the war before it truly began. However, conflicting reports kept Pompey in the dark, and he had no idea that Caesar had just one understrength legion with him. Pompey could have levied large numbers in Italy, but only had 2 full legions in the area, the veteran 1st Legion and the 15th. Both had recently been handed over by Caesar to the Senate to fight a planned war in Syria. The 1st, having been raised by Pompey, could be trusted to fight on his behalf, but the 15th was raised by Caesar and its loyalty was questionable. Most of Pompey's best legions were abroad in either Hispania or the east. Pompey knew he could not risk being trapped or forced into a battle he wasn't prepared for. He had the resources of the Republic at his disposal and could afford to fight a prolonged war. As a result, Pompey made the difficult decision to abandon Rome. With him went the majority of the Senate, including the 2 consuls. According to Plutarch, abandoning Rome was an early blow to the popularity of the Pompeian faction. Cassius Dio gives a much more divisive picture of the Roman mentality, saying that in doing this, Pompey had made an enemy of his supporters. Moreover, in the rush to evacuate the city, the treasury of Rome and the temple treasures were abandoned. For Caesar, this was ideal. With the city and treasure abandoned, he was content to bypass it and claim it later, focusing instead on trying to catch Pompey and capturing other cities in Italy to cut off support for the Pompeians and rally more men to his cause. Despite this fortuitous start, Caesar also suffered a blow in these early stages of the war. When the final act had been passed by the Senate, the majority of Caesar's supporters in Rome, including Mark Antony and Curio, had fled to join their general. However, one of Caesar's lieutenants was not so eager to abandon the Senate's cause, Labienus. Labienus was still in Gaul when Caesar crossed the Rubicon, and it's likely that Caesar would have wanted Labienus to march his Gallic legions to Italy and join the fight with him there. Instead, Labienus disavowed Caesar, promising his allegiance to the Senate and fleeing Gaul with a personal bodyguard to join Pompey. This was a blow to Caesar personally and militarily, as Labienus was Caesar's right-hand man and a highly capable general, comparable even to both Pompey and Caesar, who was familiar with Caesar's tactics. Despite Labienus fleeing Gaul, Caesar's legions still followed their orders to move towards Italy. Two of the closest legions, the 8th and 12th, were already beginning to cross into Italy to support their general. As Caesar continued his push south, Pompey began to rally the defences around Capua and raise an army in the south. He still had the veteran 1st Legion. The 15th Legion had remained loyal to him, and he had ordered many cities to raise levies against Caesar, quickly building his numbers. However, one man, Domitius Ahenobarbus, decided to take the initiative against Caesar. Counter to Pompey's orders, he took 30 newly levied cohorts, equivalent to around 3 legions, to Corfinium, an important crossroads town. By the time Caesar reached Corfinium, the 8th and 12th legions had caught up with him, giving him 3 battle-hardened legions. Faced with such a formidable force, the Pompeian levies lost all desire to fight. They implored Ahenobarbus to surrender, and he reluctantly agreed. Caesar showed clemency to both the levies and Ahenobarbus. Ahenobarbus was pardoned, but he quickly returned to Pompey in southern Italy to continue the fight. The levies, on the other hand, were made to swear allegiance to Caesar, forming the 15th, 16th, and 17th legions, swelling his numbers even further, and reducing Pompey's without a battle even being fought. He immediately sent these men to prepare for an invasion of Sicily and Sardinia whilst he continued south. Caesar's leniency at Corfinium gained him popularity across Italy, ensuring that there would be no popular uprising against him on behalf of Pompey, and he was able to raise a further 3 legions, the 18th, 19th, and 20th, as he marched. Pompey now had to change his plan. He knew that he would no longer be able to fight Caesar in Italy anytime soon. He abandoned his plan of fighting Caesar in the south, and instead marched his force to Brundisium, preparing to evacuate from the peninsula. He would go across the Adriatic and into Greece, where legions from the east, battle-tested and loyal, would join him, and he would be able to muster even more men from allies and cities of the east. Moreover, he had numerous legions in Hispania, and with their help could have encircled Caesar in Italy, but first he had to escape. Caesar needed to move fast. If he could catch Pompey in southern Italy, he would be able to corner and defeat him, much as had happened to Spartacus decades earlier. As he pursued Pompey into the south, he continuously sent envoys insisting he would step down from command if Pompey would do the same. All such offers were refused. Pompey legally had the authority to command armies, and Caesar was a criminal. The time for negotiations was long gone, and it is likely Caesar himself knew this, so the envoy's true intention was likely to continue to buy him favour with the populace as he continued to chase the Senate. In early March, Caesar and his 6 legions caught up with Pompey at Brundisium. By the time that Caesar arrived, Pompey had already managed to transport half his force across the Adriatic. Caesar wasted no time, immediately besieging the city and beginning construction of a breakwater across the harbour to block it. In response, Pompey built large towers on merchant ships that could fire down on Caesar's engineers to hamper their progress. The strategy was effective, and Caesar's engineers were unable to complete the breakwater in time. Pompey's navy returned from Greece, and at night, Pompey was able to evacuate his remaining force from the city. Once in Greece, Pompey marched to Thessalonica. He established his base, levying new legions and sending envoys to all the client kings he had made in the east, gathering Roman legions and foreign soldiers alike to his banner. Meanwhile, he sent subordinates to Sicily, Sardinia, and North Africa, the three key grain suppliers of Rome. Pompey would mobilize forces from across the world to effectively besiege the whole of Italy, cutting off the grain supplies and starving Caesar into submission. It had taken Caesar just 3 months to force Pompey out of Rome and take Italy. Despite this, Caesar's initial plan to capture Pompey and the Senate in the process, ending the war quickly, failed. With Pompey's escape, and with no ships to pursue him, the chance for any quick resolution disappeared. Caesar began preparing for a prolonged war. He first marched on Rome, entering in a triumph. Quickly he convened what was left of the Senate in Rome, professing his ambition to save the Republic and declaring Pompey an enemy of the state. He also plundered the treasury and temples of Rome, allowing him to fully equip the 6 newly acquired legions, and issued orders for ships from all the provinces loyal to him to gather at Brundisium. These ships would take at least a year to muster though, and Caesar could not linger for long. He realized that he could not risk being trapped in Italy, and resolved to secure his western flank. Spanish legions had a significant number of Pompey's best soldiers, and posed a threat to Gaul. Furthermore, with Pompey in the east, the Spanish legions, though well trained, were, in Caesar's words, an army without a leader. Caesar would attack Pompey's force in the west individually, attempting to defeat them in detail before returning to Pompey. To achieve this, he sent one of the newly raised legions, the 16th, under his legate Valerius to Sardinia, and 2 legions, likely the 15th and 17th, under Curio to Sicily. Together, they were to take control of the islands and then push into Africa, securing the grain supply. Sardinia was currently held by Cotta on behalf of Pompey, and Sicily by Cato. Cotta had no real force to speak of, and as soon as the citizens of the Sardinian capital of Carolis heard that Valerius was en route with the legion, they ejected Cotta, seeing no sense in attempting to resist the Caesarians. Cotta fled to Africa, and Valerius quickly took control of the province. Cato in Sicily had attempted to make better preparations, raising levies across Sicily, but had also not been provided with any legions by Pompey. He too saw a fight against 2 legions with his levies as a fruitless task, also deciding to abandon the province, joining Pompey in Greece. With the islands taken without any resistance, Valerius and Curio gathered their force in Sicily and prepared for the attack on Africa. Meanwhile, Caesar, after spending less than a month in Rome, took the newly raised 18th and 19th and began his march to Spain, leaving Mark Antony in charge of Rome and the 8th, 12th and 13th legions in Italy to recover, with the 20th ready to support Curio if needed. Caesar himself aimed to march through Gaul to Spain and meet 7 of his legions along the way. However, Ahenobarbus, who had previously attempted to stall Caesar at Corfinium, had already been dispatched by Pompey to Gaul and was currently on his way to the city of Massilia, an important city on the route to Spain. Caesar arrived at the city before Ahenobarbus, sometime in early April, but found the gates already closed and the Massilians preparing their defences, calling on local tribes for help and collecting in grain. Caesar attempted to negotiate with the Massilians, who, perhaps stalling for time, stated their neutrality in the war. However, once Ahenobarbus did arrive, they became more proactive, attacking nearby shipping in order to bolster their supplies. With their force numbering approximately 8,000 men, this could have developed into a prolonged siege, something Caesar simply did not have the time for. He needed to be in Spain, not bogged down in a siege in Gaul. As such, he left the 3 legions with Trebonius in control, while Decimus Brutus, who had proved his knack for naval command against the Venetii, was to command 12 ships. Caesar then continued to Spain with a bodyguard of approximately 900 cavalry. Another legate of Caesar's, Fabius, had been sent with 3 legions in advance to make a foothold in Spain, taking control of the Pyrenean passes. Soon another 3 legions from Gaul, as well as auxiliaries, joined them. Caesarian forces would have been approximately 25,000 to 30,000 legionaries, 5,000 auxiliaries, and 6,000 cavalry, all veterans of the Gallic Wars. Now united, they began to push past the Pyrenees and into the Iberian Peninsula. The Pompeian forces in Spain were just as formidable. Spain had been assigned to Pompey as his province to govern, but he had left this responsibility to 3 of his legates. Marcus Varro was more a scholar than a soldier, but Lucius Afranius and Marcus Petreius each had almost 30 years military experience behind them, as well as experience fighting in Iberia during the Sertorian Wars. Afranius and Petreius would take 5 legions plus auxiliaries to confront Caesar, while Varro would defend further Spain with 2 legions as a reserve. In total, by Caesar's account, Afranius and Petreius commanded approximately 27,500 legionaries, 8,000 auxiliaries, and perhaps 10,000 cavalry. The Pompeian forces had encamped in a strong position on high ground on the west side of the river Sicoris, just outside the hilltop town of Ilerda, which controlled a stone bridge, a key access point into the peninsula. When Fabius arrived with Caesar's legions, he saw that crossing the bridge would be nigh impossible given the Pompeians' strong position, and so constructed 2 new wooden bridges across the river 6 kilometers apart, and also encamped on the western bank. As the Pompeians had arrived beforehand, they had already stripped the western bank of most supplies, forcing Fabius to send foraging parties across the bridges to the eastern bank. These foraging parties and their escorts often skirmished with the Pompeian cavalry, but there was no major conflict. However, on one of these occasions, Fabius sent 2 legions across to the east bank to forage, with a strong cavalry escort to follow and protect the foraging parties, when a sudden storm swept in, destroying the bridge nearest to the Fabian camp. The cavalry was stuck on the western bank, with the legions and foraging party on the eastern bank. Afranius wasted no time in seizing upon such an opportunity, immediately sending 4 legions and all his cavalry across the stone bridge to attack the beleaguered Caesarians. The Caesarian legions were well trained and experienced, quickly forming a defensive square on high ground with the foraging party in the center. Heavily outnumbered, the Caesarian forces held their formation while being assaulted from all sides by Pompeian infantry and cavalry. Despite their discipline, it would only be a matter of time before the formation broke and the soldiers were slaughtered. Fortunately, Fabius had also reacted quickly to the situation, sending another 2 legions across the river via the second bridge 6 kilometers away. Upon their arrival, the Pompeians broke off their attack, not wanting to wholly commit without their full force. They returned to camp, allowing the Caesarians to make an orderly retreat back to theirs. The sources do not give us an idea of how many casualties the Caesarians sustained, but it is likely given the situation that they would have been significant, and certainly more than the Pompeians. A couple of days after this engagement, sometime in June, Caesar arrived at the camp with his bodyguard. Fabius, despite the prior engagement, had fulfilled his duties well. He had pushed through the Pyrenees, established a foothold, and kept Afranius in place until Caesar arrived. Nonetheless, Caesar quickly took control of the situation, finishing the repairs on the first bridge started by Fabius, and then going on the offensive. Leaving just 500 men in the first Fabian camp, Caesar marched the rest of his force nearer the town of Ilerda, offering battle to Afranius. Afranius did bring his force out of camp, but held them on the high ground, refusing to attack. He was no fool, and could not sacrifice his strong position so easily. Seeing that Afranius would not be drawn into a pitched battle, Caesar deployed his legions in 3 lines just 200 meters from Afranius' camp. The first 2 acted as a screen, whilst the back line dug trenches as the start of a fortified camp. The plan worked, and Caesar's force was able to retreat behind these defences for the night. The next day he expanded on the defences, assigning 1 legion to each side of the camp, the other 3 acting as a defensive line. Afranius tried to use his force to harass the workers, but Caesar's 3 defensive legions were able to prevent them from doing any real damage. With the camp now fully fortified, Caesar ordered the 500 men and baggage from the Fabian camp to join him in the new camp. Caesar soon noted a mound between Afranius' camp and Ilerda, and determined to take and fortify it, thereby cutting off Afranius from the supplies in the town. Starving out an enemy by such tactics was a favoured strategy of Caesar, and he had tried something very similar at Gergovia against Vercingetorix. Gathering 3 legions, the 9th, 14th and likely the 10th, he drew them up for battle. Caesar first sent the vanguard of the 14th to charge the mound, hoping to take it quickly and hold it while the rest of Caesar's legions followed up in good order. However, Afranius was quick to react, sending his own force to charge the mound. Afranius' men gained the top first, and with the advantage of the high ground, forced the men of the 14th to retreat back to their standards. Afranius reinforced his men and attempted to push his advantage, chasing Caesar's men and beginning to push the now shaken 14th Legion on Caesar's right flank. Caesar himself notes how fiercely Afranius' men fought. Long campaigns against the Iberian tribes had made these men battle-hardened and fierce fighters who fought in a looser formation than Caesar's legions. Caesar's right flank began slowly giving ground, the 14th attempting to retreat to higher ground. Seeing his line on the brink of breaking, Caesar ordered the 9th Legion to support his right flank, pushing back the Pompeian forces. The Pompeians quickly retreated to a stronger defensive location, taking up positions on the high ground outside the walls of Ilerda. The 9th Legion, thinking the Pompeians were routing, pursued them, but quickly found themselves caught in a precarious situation. The slope of the hill that Ilerda was situated on was narrow, funneling the 9th and exposing them to a hail of missiles from the Pompeians on the high ground. The fighting was bitter, with each force sending reinforcing cohorts to refresh the front lines. For 5 hours the 2 forces struggled on the slope below the town. In a last bid to salvage the situation, Caesar ordered his infantry to charge the lines, pushing over the crest of the slope and forcing the Pompeians against the walls of the city. With the crest of the slope gained, Caesar's cavalry was finally allowed room to maneuver and charged between the forces, allowing Caesar's legions to retreat in good order to their camp. In Caesar's account, he portrays this as a draw, saying 70 of his men died with 600 wounded, compared to 200 Pompeians dead. The reality is that Caesar lost the day. Given the situation that Caesar's legions were fighting in, and their need to retreat, it is far more likely that Caesar's men suffered more casualties. Moreover, Caesar had failed to take the mound as he had originally hoped. Indeed, by the end of the day, the Pompeians held and fortified the mound. This was Caesar's first fight against other Roman legions. He had underestimated them, overcommitted his forces, and paid the consequences. Caesar's situation then continues to worsen. A second storm brought a huge flood down the river, destroying both the bridges constructed by himself and Fabius. Caesar was cut off from his supply line, and the supplies he did have were dwindling. Afranius, on the other hand, had an abundance of supplies he had collected in Ilerda prior to Fabius's arrival, as well as control of the Ilerdan stone bridge. Caesar did have supplies, and almost 6,000 auxiliary reinforcements of archers and cavalry en route from Gaul. But with control of the bridge, Afranius was able to send 3 legions to attack them, killing 200 and forcing the rest to make camp on high ground. For the time being, the situation for Caesar was precarious. His army had, so far, had the worst of the fighting, was running low on food, and was cut off from reinforcements. Afranius even sent messages to Varro, declaring the war to be almost won. However, if there was one person who could turn such a disaster into a victory, it would be Caesar, and in the next episode we will learn how he found a way out of this predicament. The sponsor of this video, Call of War, allows you to take command of your nation's army during the darkest hours of human history, the Second World War. In this free online strategy game, you get to fight up to 100 other players in real time and rewrite the history of World War II. Support our channel by downloading Call of War via the link in the description and receive a free starter pack with 1 month of High Command and 13,000 gold with a value of $10. The offer is available for 30 days from the release of this video. So make sure you are subscribed to our channel and have pressed the bell button. We would like to express our gratitude to our Patreon supporters and channel members who make the creation of our videos possible. Now you can also support us by buying our merchandise via the link in the description. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.